Wonderful. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our Inside the C-Suite today with Martin Tanguay. Martin, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time, and it's been nice kind of getting to have some conversations leading up to today. So thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure, Samantha. Thank you for the invitation. And I hope that our conversation will inspire some opportunities for personal reflection on people that are joining us today.
I love that. So, today I think the conversation is really not going to be just about HR, right? And I think for those of you who are listening, Martin has had an incredible career across, a number of industries and organizations, and a lot of learning along the way. So we're fortunate to have you here today, Martin, to kind of demystify, as always, what does it take to get to the top, and how do you stay there, and how do you be effective and add value while you're there. So if you want to just, as always, I always like to have our guests introduce themselves in terms of what has been your career path. If you want to shine some light on how did you get here?
Yeah, well, good question. First, I think I was fortunate enough to make a good choice at the time of choosing my university program. I hesitated between two or three options and ended up uh, registering to the labor relations or industrial relations program at Montreal University. So I've completed that, and then right after, started my career in distribution with Purolator Courier. At the time, in a HR advisor role with a key focus on labor relations and health and safety. Uh, I was offered an opportunity relatively early on in my career of moving from HR to managing operations. I had a boss that came to see me, and I remember that conversation, and he said, Martin, why don't you get a real job? Stop losing your time in HR and come and manage operations and so on. So he gave me a great opportunity. And I think that was not only an accelerator on in terms of my progression professionally speaking, but I think it also tainted a lot the kind of HR professional that I've become over time, having been truly in the seat of an operational leader that we as HR professionals we typically support. So I've done that for a couple of years, and then was offered an opportunity in the airline industry with Canadian Airline that unfortunately is not
No
in
longer.
operations. Yeah, no longer went bankrupt 96, 97. Again, in a role where labor relations was pretty much at the center of what I was doing. Then, after the bankruptcy and so on, ended up in the financial industry with Caisse Populaire Desjardins or Fédération des Caisses Desjardins in a labor relation advisor position where I had a caseload of 25, 30 branches that I was supporting with employee relation issues, labor relation issues, and so on. And then finally, I got a call from a recruiter for a first, I'll call it senior role as GM, General Manager of HR for Yellow Pages Group at the time. That was a subsidiary of Bell Canada that had been sold to a private U.S. equity, KKR. And so I decided to try to sell myself for the position and ended up being selected. So, and in that basically was the first time I had to step up a little bit and not only manage labor relations, which was still an important responsibility I had, but also recruitment, talent, development, compensation. So there were a couple of other elements that I hadn't been that exposed to up to that point in my career. And then basically after 5 or 6 years, I had an opportunity to join Rio Tinto,
Yes.
big multinational organization. And there I made a conscious choice of moving into a more specialized role in training and organizational development, because that was the, I'll say, the softer aspect of HR that I hadn't been exposed to at that point. And again, aligning with my objective of one day becoming the leader of the HR function, I felt I needed to be exposed to that. So it
Yeah.
was with Rio Tinto for a couple of years in a couple of different positions. Then had an opportunity to go in manufacturing in a very, very fun industry, the toy industry of adults, Bombardier Recreational Products,
Yes.
where we manufacture skidoos and sea-doos and Can-Am spiders and so on. And this is probably where also I was the most involved in my career at that stage,
Yep.
internationally speaking, as I was responsible for the international division of BRP, traveling regularly to South America, the Europe, as well as Asia Pacific. And then when I left Rio Tinto, I was approached by a headhunter, and they were seeking for a chief HR officer for an organization I didn't know at the time called Somax, small organization started by Jacques Gauthier, an entrepreneur here in Quebec. At the time, probably $100-ish million in revenue, but Caisse de dépôt et placement had taken a stake in the organization, and they were positioning themselves for an aggressive growth plan. So I decided to take the risk and join the organization. And interestingly enough, from 2017, when I initially joined, to the end of 21, our top line moved from 100 million to 1.2 billion. And our number of employees went from about 120 to 2,400 total across
Huge.
multiple locations worldwide. So in Asia Pacific, China was there, Malaysia, Thailand. In Europe, we had several countries in which we operated. One that was completely new for me was Egypt. So
Mm.
again, a completely new type of environment. And then I think after 7 years in the role, I felt that I had contributed to the height I could, and try to work very hard to help the organization go where it wanted to be. And then I got another call from a recruiter, and that was about the group de chaîne position here that I landed in a little more than a year ago, September 2025. And that's been where I've pretty much worked in the last 15 months, understanding the organization, trying to, again, as I say to a lot of people, try to understand where we come from as an organization, where we're at today, and where we want to go.
Yes.
And I think now we're at the stage where we start implementing some of the ideas and strategies that have been discussed and shared with the senior leadership team here, as well as the board of directors.
Wow. Thanks for that overview. It's interesting because you've really lived a lot of different lives in HR, right? Like anybody with that deep HR experience. I mean, you've been through we were through the last recession in 2009, 2010. Even when you started your career, like we spoke about earlier, it was personnel. It wasn't even, there were
Right.
no HR business partners, or right. It was more administrative or transactional back when I think first got into HR. And I think HR, well, not I think, we know HR has taken a beating over the past couple of years, right? I mean, 2020 with COVID, and then we were in the talent shortage, and organizations are looking at employer branding and candidate experience and how do we, attract and retain talent. And then we get into kind of this recession a little bit. Some are not calling it that, some are, but slowing down, let's just say, of the economy. How is HR able to keep up with this? I mean, it's a lot, right? And I think what I've noticed, I mean, we saw it during COVID, is that I think HR was the holy grail of keeping organizations going, and they were the ones that were almost most impacted and burnt out after.
That's it's interesting because again, talking to to the network, to the people I know, and so on. I think you've pretty much had two different reactions and outcome to
Mm,
COVID for the HR function. In many organizations, you're absolutely right, and that was the opportunity for HR to step up
yeah.
and truly make a difference, right?
Yes.
I sometimes make a joke to people where I felt that from one day to the other, at the time lockouts were commanded and so on, that I became the CEO of COVID-19. So, and nothing had prepared me for that. You're in your office and people are calling you and nothing. What do we do? What do we do? How do we deal with that? And so on. And I have to say that month of April was one where there was not a lot of sleeping hours,
No.
just to understand and again try to see how we ensure business continuity wherever possible while ensuring safety and a healthy environment for our employees and so on. I think you also had another situation where unfortunately HR missed that opportunity to step up. And I think that was detrimental to their positioning, credibility, and even level of influence that I think some are still recovering from today. Going through COVID again brought a lot of unknown, again, ambiguity that I think that was a career development accelerator for a lot of people
Yes.
because, again, how do you prepare for this?
Yeah.
You go, you complete your MBA, your bachelor's degree, and so on, even you working for 10, 15, 20 years. This is not something that we've been prepared to manage and handle.
Hmm.
So, out of that, you're absolutely right. I think HR took the height of the podium for at least about 2 years, and then coming in back to a more, I'll say, normal reality. Here we go with the talent crisis, where people were jumping off ship, and you would see a spiral of increased compensation offers in the market and so on. How do we attract, but how do we hold to the people that we have at the moment and so on? So, again, a lot of sensitivity from CEOs and other executives to, geez, we need to do something now. What's interesting is, again, talking to other HR leaders, 23 ish, mid 23, late 23, I started to hear things like, hey, how about we come back now to the regular management of the business? So we've been talking a lot about HR,
Yeah.
but how about we come back to operation? How about we come back to our clients? How about we come back to finance? And I think this is where, honestly, now we've started to be a little more challenged from a budget standpoint, from a resource standpoint, and so on. Obviously, it also coincided with the talent market stabilizing a little bit
Yeah.
with the arrival of a new leader in the US that unfortunately has created some uncertainty, some ambiguity, and so on. So we're not necessarily in a recession now, but you feel that a lot of organizations are just on hold just to
Hold
be
your breath.
able to get clearer visibility
Mhm.
on where things will be going moving forward in the next year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really an interesting and for me drastic change and positioning of many of the HR roles and professionals in organizations through that crisis, COVID-19.
I think it tested a lot of senior leaders in terms of you know how to manage change, like you said, and put in guardrails to be able to support organizations. Like the cream rose to the top too, right?
Yeah,
So
correct.
was to your point, career defining for a lot of leaders who it was their chance to shine, and where we saw also in some cases where all of a sudden we started hearing that okay, you could be CHRO and move into a CEO role. We hadn't really heard of that
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
So I want to go back to, oh, by the way, anybody who's listening, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll get through it a little bit later, happily. But you had mentioned that you were enticed to go work in operations, and I want to talk about that a little bit because, as we discussed before, I've met some terrific HR leaders who that's exactly what they did. They moved into operations. They got exposure on the plant floor or in the warehouse, and some of them stayed in, moving up in operations, and other people kind of popped back over into HR, but with a completely different perspective. And I would say also with more credibility with leaders, because they understood what it took to run the operation. So can you talk a little bit more about how that kind of changed the trajectory a little bit of your career and what you got from that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I would say, being in the seat and having to make operational day-to-day decisions, sometimes dealing with employee issues, performance issues, and so on. It's one thing, as I said to younger professional on a regular basis. It's one thing to say and play your role as an advisor to say, hey, here's how you prepare, make sure that you have your examples and so on, and to be the person that has to deliver the message.
Mm-hmm.
So for me at that stage, I had no management or leadership experience. It was the first time.
Right.
And so the feeling sometimes of being not or uncomfortable with that, even if you know you're doing the right thing. So that I'll say it probably developed for me one, respect, a notion of respect for our operational leaders because they have a tough job to do. I'm not going to say HR is easy, but I think to have that respect, also to have the empathy of trying to position myself in their shoes.
Mm.
And I think as now afterwards, as I was able to consult with them and give them ideas and advices and so on, so that they would be more comfortable doing it, I had the opportunity to mention to them, I have been in your shoes.
Right.
And I felt that way one day and so on. And I think it probably gave me uh, a little more credibility in their eyes because they knew I had been in a similar position, not just being an HR expert
Yeah.
at prepping them for conveying sometimes bad news.
I think also understanding the depth of the business, right?
Correct.
I've had conversations with CEOs, with heads of ops, and they say, gosh, I mean, the best HR leaders are the ones who really understand our business, who take the time to, to talk to us, and sometimes, walk the floor if needed, right, to get better clarity. And so, at the same time, what I've seen come as a detriment to HR leaders who want to grow their careers has been kind of the resistance to the financial acumen piece. So I think a lot of people go into HR initially when we're in university, right? Like we go into that because we love working with people, but at the end of the day, this is really, HR has become it really is a business role, right?
It is a business role. Most of the time when I introduce myself, Samantha, today, I'm first and foremost a business leader
Yeah.
that happens to be specialized in the field of HR.
Right.
And a strong belief of mine has been throughout my career, we don't do HR for HR.
Mm-hmm.
We do HR in the context of an organization, of operations, of servicing client needs, and so on. So you need to understand the context in which you are required to provide support strategies and manage activities because, again, I've been involved in airline and financials and in manufacturing. And although we're dealing with people, the reality, the way we act, some of the things we do might be super good for organization A, but will not go well at all with organization B. So
Right.
it's about contextualizing the work we do and the solutions we bring to the table to the environment that we serve. And
Hmm.
so for me, again, that passion, and when we talk about people interested in executive positions, that's the one thing is you realize quickly as you go up in responsibilities uh, that it's not operations or people serving you. It's about you coming to the table to try to make people's life easier, more productive, more pleasant, providing them with challenges and so on. But if you don't understand exactly how things are being managed in your organization and that you bring processes or activities that people will receive, that's probably the one example that everybody has heard. Sometimes when you're in a big organization, you have the field and you have head office, and
Right.
people will say it's an ivory tower.
Mm.
They're
Sure.
not connected. They don't understand. So I think these are the types of things that I've been very, very cautious with as I was progressing, not to lose sight of what we do. And what we do doesn't happen in head office. It
Mm.
happens in the branches, in the plants, in the warehouses that we operate.
And what are some reflections or pieces of advice that you were given kind of, at some point in your career that helped propel you into more senior leadership roles?
Oh, good question. I think I've been fortunate to meet, work, collaborate with many, many leaders that had a significant impact. And not joking, but in some cases it was not super positive, but still, even when the conversations or things are difficult, you still learn
Yeah.
and there's still takeaways from that. I'll say there's definitely for me as I look back, there's been one situation, one event that had a drastic impact on my path, and that was me looking for a job back in 2008 and meeting with a CHRO here in the Montreal region for about 90 minutes. He was recruiting at the time for a VP of HR, and I felt good about the conversation. And at the end, 90 minutes, he said, "Nothing, good conversation. Really appreciate your background and so on, but it's not going to work." And I said, "Wow, okay, why?" And he said, looking at your background today, you've been too much focused on labor relations. And when we look today at the role and the contribution of that VP position that we're recruiting for, I need someone that's been exposed more to succession planning, to employee development, to employee engagement, to performance management. So, what we typically refer to as the softer aspects of the HR function. So, I left that meeting, uh, I'll say, a little bit discouraged.
Sure.
Wow, if my objective is to one day be a leader of the HR function, if that gentleman thinks that way, chances are he's not going to be the only one.
Hmm.
So on that, I said, what do I do with that? That's great feedback, but if you don't do nothing with it, then it's just a conversation.
Yeah.
It led me to accept a position as director of training and OD with Rio Tinto, taking a significant cut on my overall compensation as well as on the level of responsibility, moving from a team of 25, 26 people to a small team of 7 or 8 people. And I think now, reflecting back, that's been probably the move that allowed me to make it to the position of CHRO or VP of HR. Because there's no way today in the role with the challenges that I have, and I'll say it's the same thing with what I experienced at Somax. Uh, the conversations truly revolve around talent management, succession planning, mission critical position, retention strategies for your key people. There's not a lot of employee relations or labor relations. Not that it's not important, it's very important, but I think by nature, it's a little more tactical.
Mm.
And as you progress, I think you start being involved. I'm not sure if this is something we'll address in the conversation, but I think I do make a difference between the mid-level, even sometimes relatively senior position, but that are more tactical in nature versus once you reach that C-suite level where the expectation is that you'll become a little more involved and a contributor to the strategy of the organization.
I want to go back to what you just shared in terms of taking a step back in your career because, I'm thinking about an HR leader that I know who had done something similar. So they were in a very large role, and then they had been restructured out of their organization, but they had a great package, and they could have stayed on that package for good 18 months, but instead they took a role in OD. And when I had asked, well, why are you going to take that role, they had said, because I don't have that exposure. I don't have that experience. And so the next time, when we went back to that individual, we placed them then as a VP. And it was because they had moved from HR into ops, back into HR. So they had kind of the whole package, right? And then they had that OD piece. And so not everybody can take a salary cut, and I completely get that. But sometimes it's not even about the salary. Sometimes it's the ego, right?
Right.
Where we
All
might
right.
feel, why am I gonna give that up? But it's such a great story, I would say, even when you're going on interview after, when people are, okay, so why did you take that role? It was a smaller role. Well, it was an aspect that I had never touched before. I was able to go deep on that. So I think sometimes people underestimate how important those moves really can be to the entire picture of the career.
I think that probably speaks as well to, one of the reality we see today, and it's interesting sometimes to hear the feedback and the perspective of some of my executive colleagues when we recruit talent. And, you'll see now, unfortunately, candidates that are hoppers.
Yeah.
They move from one position to the other and so on. And for me, I always say, I don't mind if people are moving. I want to understand why they're moving
Yes.
and be intentional. So if you're on a path and you're clear on where you want to go,
Mhm.
make sure that you make decisions that will bring you or help you to reach your goal. And that for me, that's the longer term view of managing your career versus making a move tomorrow for an extra $10,000, but that will just give you more of what you know already or what you've been doing for the last couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, what's been kind of some of the most surprising things that you found once you were leading HR and sitting in the executive? Is there anything? I think sometimes people have a perspective, or they imagine what it could be like, and sometimes it's not that. So, was there anything that really kind of surprised you as you moved into more senior roles?
I wouldn't say surprise, because it's like management. The first time somebody gives you an opportunity to lead others,
Yeah.
I think you can try to understand truly what it means, but it's not before you're in the role and living some of these dynamics and challenges and so on that you truly start to understand what it truly means and what truly you're comfortable with and in some cases, what you're not so comfortable with.
Right.
So, when I look at myself, and even today, the managing myself, couple of directors that are senior positions. But I would say the big change for me, the big difference between the executive position and a senior, more operational position is in scope. I think it's an impact. It's
Yeah.
in strategic focus. For people that are mid-level HR, their work typically emphasizes tactical execution, or you manage a specific function. You're
Right.
an expert at recruitment, or you're an expert at labor relation. And the key focus there is more day-to-day and operational efficiency, and you're typically working with a perspective that's more short term. So you look at immediate issues, or within the next couple of months and so on, and most of the time that's within established guidelines, processes, or frameworks. So they're there. You arrive, again, I'll speak to my own reality, but arriving in the C-suite for me was difficult, because now people look up to you, not only within your own function, but across the organization, to say, Martin, what do you think?
What's the
Where do
strategy?
we go? What do we do? How do we evolve with that process, and so on? So again, you quickly realize that most of your conversations, most of the things you're being asked to work on and that you focus on and so on, will help shape organizational culture, for example, or provide alignment of your talent strategies to business goals. Or even sometimes you're part of a conversation with the CEO, sometimes at board level, and decisions that will impact the enterprise in its totality. And so the complexity that comes with that, you have your own plant or region that you manage, and then you say, I'm going to make that decision, or we'll do this and that. I think the impact can be contained. I think when you go across your entire organization, and that's probably also one, I'll say, lesson I had out of that, is when I was in mid-level positions, sometimes I was looking up to my senior leaders
Mm.
and say, why it's taking so long for them to make decisions and so on?
Mm-hmm.
I have to say, I understand now.
You understand why.
And it's not because people are not able to make decision. It's just that once that decision's made at the top, and assume just a CEO decision, it affects thousands of people. And
Mm-hmm.
if it's not the right decision, you can create a lot of turbulence
Yeah.
in your organization. Not to say we're always 100%, that's not a fair statement, but I think and that's, I'll say, the humility that you have to start to demonstrate, to say, hey, I know a lot, but there's also a lot I don't know, and I need to make sure to validate and to talk to the people that probably know more than me, specifically on these people or on this reality and so on, to help guide my own decision making process, so that ultimately we do what's right for the whole of the business,
Mm.
not what Martin Tanguay feels as the HR leader. So I think that for me was a big aha moment at some point, because I recall being so frustrated with senior leaders taking months for a decision I felt, based on my scope, my reality, my client groups, was,
Right.
was just an easy decision to make.
Mm-hmm. What are, I mean, you've worked directly with the CEO of a number of organizations now. What do they all care about when it comes to HR? What's the commonality there?
I'm not sure. I work with two CEOs.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's common to all CEOs, but I think I have two different profiles. So I'll go back to Solmax at the time, working with Jean-Louis Vangelu. Jean-Louis, what I found extremely interesting with him, not so much a people person, but extremely sensitive to
Mhm.
people dynamics. And I think for me, he communicated on a couple of occasions that for him, what was the most sensitive and most key focus areas was IT and HR. And typically, what we see in organization is CEOs focusing a lot on finance, focusing a lot on operations, focusing a lot on sales. At
Sales.
the end, you realize everything is critical and important. But I think as we were going through that transformation with Somax, and a little bit of what a lot of organization will experience in the coming years is we see more and more technology in the workplace, digitalization as well, and so on. And so systems, technologies, as well as the people are
Mhm.
going to be your two key enablers to bring your organization forward. Not that finance not critical. If finance are not there,
Yeah.
you're not going to operate and so on. But so day-to-day interactions with Jean Louis. A lot of conversations that honestly did not, at the beginning of our discussion, did not concern HR.
So this.
We were talking about growth opportunities and sales coverage
Mhm.
models in a specific region and so on. And so I think this is where, for me, back to your comment of earlier about having interest and understanding of the business reality.
Yes.
And then once I understood what was he seeking out of that conversation and so on, then for me to understand that and say, okay, do I see any implication with people management?
Right.
Is there any risks or threats or opportunities based on what he's trying to look at and consider and so on that I could proactively identify and maybe bring back for our next conversation?
Mhm.
So that was the type of relationship, high level of trust and confidence between the two of us. Move here to Groupe Deschênes. Groupe Deschênes is a family owned business.
Yeah.
So the reality today is my CEO also happens to be the owner.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes, even today, and we've discussed that last week, the two of us, sometimes for me, it's not always easy today. That's part of my challenge to say, what hat is he wearing when we're having the conversation?
Mm.
Having a conversation with your CEO is one thing. Having a perspective of an owner, I think, is another one. Very, very proud of where the organization, and for the right reasons. It's been a very, very successful organization over time that have done lots of great things and so on. Now the organization has grown substantially, just probably in the last 7 to 10 years, 8 to 10 acquisitions. So a big influx of new people, new reality, and so on, and extremely proud of the culture.
Mm.
And sometimes I'm joking to say if somebody would have a camera of me and Francois having a conversation together, and then you don't know us, and you say, "Who's the VP of HR?" It wouldn't be obvious.
Wow.
So that's the
Right.
one thing. And when I joined Group Deschênes here, one of the things I asked Francois at the time is, Francois, I've been a dentist before, meaning I had to pull teeth
Yeah.
of explaining and convincing why it's important to take care of our people. And that I'm not looking for that anymore, and that's exactly the environment that I found here. Very sensitive towards people, towards culture, so the playing field for an HR professional is super interesting. Super interesting. Lots of challenges, lots of complexities and so on, but a CEO that understands and is very, very sensitive to people management dimensions.
Yes. Well, and we see HR leaving when, the CEOs don't believe in HR. It becomes very evident also, right? Because then they're not included in the right conversations. You've got high turnover, you have, discontent, low engagement scores, so on and so forth. So it
Right.
really shows, right? The
Right.
numbers are high. Yeah.
Right. And I think that speaks, just back to the conversation of earlier on being intentional with, making your choices of accepting new roles and so on. Uh, I've made a mistake once in my career, and it's a mistake that I think had me learned something. So it's not that everybody is 100% perfect on every decision they make on accepting and moving on their career. But I think that's the one thing for me as now as an executive, and we've talked earlier about culture.
Yes.
I think it's an imperative. If you want to be successful in an executive HR position, you need to be fully aligned with the culture of that organization. If you feel that tension all the time, my take is it's probably not going to take that many years before you say it there's too
Yeah,
much
it's not
tension.
go- yeah.
And there's no good or bad culture. There's culture that would fit better to some sort of individuals and other individuals, and there's certainly organizations that I wouldn't work for
Right.
just because of that. I wouldn't be comfortable supporting the way they manage that organization because it doesn't resonate with my personal values and views.
Right. Right. So, two things that you have said, it's been consistent in this series that we've had with different leaders, and one is, having a vision of where you want to go in your career. Some guests have shared that they really had a plan, like really like almost a business plan for their life, right, and for their career. And then the other thing was, when opportunities present themselves, to be able to seize those opportunities and not be afraid of it. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you were ready when recruiters called you with an opportunity. Um, was there ever a time where you felt, oh my gosh, this role seems bigger than what I have been doing, what I'm prepared for, but I'm going to jump in anyway? Like fake it till you make it, right? Because
Yeah, I would say, it's an interesting question. I don't think I felt that way. I think that I typically have good level of or self-confidence.
yeah,
But I think it's important to be self-conscious, to
yes,
be self-aware of, the things you're super good at and sometimes the things you're not so good or not as comfortable,
sure,
and especially in leadership position to make sure that you build your team to help compensate for that, right?
yes,
As I've said, if you have a team of 10 Martin Tanguy, you're not going to be a high performing team because we're all going to be doing the same friggin' mistakes, and we'll have the same blind spots and so on. So again, that humility of knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And the other thing that I realized as I progressed is um, I used to think as a leader that my number one responsibility was to give my people answers to their questions. Someone would come to me, Martin, we have that problem. What do we do? Boom. That's
yeah,
what we do. And interestingly enough, now after roughly 35 years, I have to say today, I have most of the time way more questions than I have answers.
mhm,
And I think in conversations, sometimes there are things that maybe you can take that and you say, wow, that's something I'm going to leverage in the future as well. And my ex CEO, at some point when we were having a conversation, he said, I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I feel as an executive team, we're too good at providing answers and
Wow,
not good enough at asking the right questions.
that's really good.
So again, that it has you step back and say, wow, okay. And the world goes quickly and sometimes, operational and you want to fix issues and problems. And in some cases, yes, it's relatively contained and simple. So yes, speed is there and it's going to be appreciated and so on. But as I stated earlier, when you start making decisions that will impact a large portion of your population, don't be too confident in your own ability to identify what's right or wrong or what's going to work or not work. Just take
Mhm.
the time to go and validate. And because there's every time I go through that process, there's going to be one or two or three conversations where someone shares a perspective that I had not even thought of.
Mhm.
I say, wow. So that's the way you'd receive that communication? Yeah. Okay. So
Well, it
that
creates-
means correct. That means we need to readjust and make sure that we take that into account.
yeah, and it creates coaching opportunities, right? I think when
Right.
we feed the answers, it's like let's just to your point, it's speed, it's easy, it's like, but then what's your team learning? What are your leaders learning? How are they growing? How are they developing when you're feeding them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, one of the
And,
things
and
that
if I may, Samantha, just on that, but we talk about culture sometimes,
Mhm.
and I think that's also an important element for me is as an organization, we can say things, but what we do, our behaviors, they speak much louder than the words we use. And one of the things I'm always very, very sensitive to is what do we value as an
Yes.
organization? And in some cases, and I've worked in some organizations where if you're a firefighter, you're top talent. People will say, you have a problem, give that to Martin. He's going to solve that. And that's what we value. If you walk by an office and you see someone looking at his or her screen and thinking, you say, wow, they're not busy.
Hmm.
And probably you don't have enough to do. So again, for me, culturally, I translate that into a culture where we react. So you don't anticipate issues, you don't anticipate problems. They arrive, you deal with it. Versus an organization where you're gonna take a little more time, but
Right.
you try to proactively anticipate and avoid having to manage the issues. Is there a way for us to do what we want to do without having to go through these and these and these specific issues? So again, I think that sends a very, very strong signal to your leaders. That's your executive leaders, but also the people coming that eventually might take these positions and might be in the roles. So again, talking about that in terms of how you manage performance, how you manage variable compensation, what is it that you reward speaks very,
Yes.
very loud about what you value.
I'm thinking about how 2 years ago, I would say, organizations were really focused on leadership development. And it's not to say that they're not still, but there's been a lot coming at organizations. Oftentimes we see that the executive roles, yes, in sales and marketing, they're kind of organic, right, in within the organization, but there's often times where organizations are going external because their executives are keeping the strategy out of the purview of their direct reports, right? And I see this in Fortune 500 companies, for example, right? Where they will say, well, our C suite, our executives are working on strategy, but their second doesn't really get to be in the same room. And so when this person all of a sudden leaves, this individual has never been in that room. They don't know who to influence. They're not speaking the same language. And so they want to go external and bring somebody in who's kind of been in those rooms before. And we see, I mean, we see this. So how do you bring your leaders into those conversations and give them the space and the opportunity to work on, and not just you, but in terms of in the organization, right? So that you can have a proper, succession plan, and the bench strength is there, and you're developing your leaders.
Yeah. I'm not gonna make a judgment, but I believe that not exposing your senior leaders that ultimately will have a responsibility to implement the strategy that you land as an executive team, I think it's a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk sometimes about strategic abilities, and people are, and I think it's a word that might not have the same meaning for everyone. For me, you can be strategic at implementation level. For me, I look today and I try to say, okay, this is where I see us going, and priority number 1, 2, and 3, and I'd like us to focus on that and so on. That's setting direction,
Mm-hmm.
and people understand that,
Yeah.
and they can process it and so on. Now, how do we bring it to life? How
Mm-hmm.
do we make it happen? That's being strategic as well. And I think this is where sometimes you need to make sure there's a link. So people need to understand at minimum, not necessarily from the initial conversation, but at some point when you start to have clearer visibility on where you'll be landing, to start bringing some of these folks here and say, hey, we're starting to think about this and that and so on. And what do you think? What, anything that would be problematic there, any other opportunities we should consider, and you engage with them in the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
not only feeds the thinking, and on many, many occasions, again, it allows you to improve even your initial idea and solution and so
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But you're also creating engagement, because once you're ready to move and proceed, they feel they own part
Yes.
of that, right? So it's not just here's the strategy, execute,
Right.
and then we'll see what happens. So you want people to have a stake in the game. So for me personally, I try to engage with my people at the earliest possible moment, so that we do create that sense of engagement and ownership. It's not Martin's strategy, it's
Right.
our strategy.
I love that. I love that. We have a comment and a question from Heather. So she said, "I can really appreciate your position on the importance of asking good questions. For me, this is true in different positions and areas of business. So, how do you ensure you provide a safe environment for others to ask questions when it can be seen as slowing down conversations?"
Hmm, that's a very interesting question. I think it's probably that, like we say, everything can be said. There's always a way to say it, and there's a way to position things. There's also a stage to do that. Sometimes I think from a coaching standpoint, that question, if you bring it in a group context and so on, might not be that well received.
Right.
But if you still need reassurance or guidance and so on, then maybe choose your moment to bring the question. I think this is where reading the air is and it's a skill that not everybody has been able to develop. But reading on, is it appropriate for me now,
Mm-hmm.
based on what I see? People are starting to look at their watches and so on. We're 5 minutes away from the end of the meeting and so on. Everything seems to be aligned. I'm not sure that's probably not the best way to express your concern or your question. So
Well,
so
one-on-ones,
right?
too. One-on-ones, town
I
halls.
think one-on-one. I think there's a stage, there's a forum,
Right.
one-on-one. Uh, small talks at the coffee machine,
Mm,
formal meeting, town hall meeting, everything can happen in these things, I think. But if you want to make sure that you're not positioning yourself or perceived as being someone that goes against, or that's not supportive, or that questions maybe even a decision that is made or is about to be made and so on, choose your forum.
right.
And sometimes even you're not necessarily, that's one aspect as well for me that I've learned in the last several years, is even if it's a question that I'm legitimate to ask in
Hmm.
my role, and that's me as CHRO, that
Yep.
could be an HR advisor. Am I the best person in the context now to be asking the question? Or should I use someone else
Ah, that's
to bring
interesting.
the question and so on? So again, it's really about reading your dynamics. Some people will say political dimensions and so on, but ultimately, if it's about truly having a legitimate question or a comment, or making a suggestion and so on for the benefit of the whole, not to stall anything,
Yeah.
right, you shouldn't mind whether it's you or something else. And I do that a lot. I'll try to use my CEO more than me, because when he asks the question or he mentions a comment, me making the same comment will not resonate the same with the people in the room.
Yeah, of course. Well, I think so. I think Heather was asking about how to create a safe environment, though, around asking questions too, right? And she mentioned reading the room. Yeah, absolutely, Heather, reading the room. So, when you talk about culture and being able to provide that safe environment where people can ask questions, it seems like, would you say one-on-ones is the best time, and you give them the space to be able to ask those questions?
I Again, I would say multiple channels.
Yeah. Okay.
But I realize one thing though is, prior for me to be in my executive position, I always felt a little uncomfortable when I had to go and present or engage
Mm,
with the senior leaders of the organization. And it's difficult to say why. Was I intimidated, or
mm,
was I not comfortable? Was I concerned about what they would think about me saying this or asking that question and so on? And today, quite frankly, I know that it's still the case for many individuals, that it's still a difficult exercise, but you try to be as authentic, as accessible
yeah.
as possible.
Love
And,
that.
and I think just by conveying what I mentioned earlier, to say there's a lot of things I don't know.
Mm, yeah.
I personally have a lot of questions on a lot of things. Hopefully, helps people feel a little more comfortable that may, okay, if my boss or if my leader doesn't have answers to everything, maybe I'm okay to have a question because I'm not sure.
So we have 2 minutes left. I always like to ask what people are reading, what podcasts they like. So, if what is it that inspires you? Do you have a podcast or a newsletter or magazine or book that you refer to quite often?
I'll say I read quite a lot on business issues, on business topics, on HR topics for sure. What I really like, and I do that regularly, is Harvard Business Review
Mhm.
articles,
Yes.
because they don't just focus on HR. You
Yep.
really have, so sometimes there's an interesting article on marketing, for example, and you say, okay, what can I learn from that? Because marketing for me, I can relate to employer branding, right? And concepts and so on. One example, just on terms of a key takeaway of one article, was on marketing many years ago, and out of that came out client segmentation.
Mm,
And why do we do that? And for
yes.
me, out of that, I said, wow, why don't we do that with our talent? Instead of having a one fits all approach across the board, how about we start looking at the different segments of talent. Everyone is important and critical to the organization, but some are a little more critical.
Mhm.
And so, how do we then come with strategies that are more tailored and specific to each of the group? That would be an example for me of a takeaway on a topic that intuitively is not linked to HR, but
Yeah.
that you can definitely bring back and leverage.
Thank you. Oh my God, we're out of time. I don't know where the time went. Martin, as always, I love your authenticity, your humility, and your storytelling. So I appreciate you joining us today, and just sharing your experience with our listeners. And thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Samantha, and I wish everybody on the call a good end of their day, regardless of where they're located on the globe today.
Thank you. Have a
Okay.
great day, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.